So I'm Clint Sparks. I am a singer, songwriter, poet, activist. I think that, activist is sometimes, when you call yourself an activist, people think that you are maybe too opinionated, or you're trying to take a stand for just anything. But it is something totally different when you have been how can I say, marginalized or targeted because of who you are. So it's not really activism in my opinion. Other people might view it as that, but it's just me taking a stance for who I am, because I have been in the position where I have personally suffered from depression, anxiety because of who I was. Had to step away from being an ordained minister. I had to step away from going to seminary because of who I was, because it wasn't accepted. But it took a few years. My parents are pastors. It took a few years for me to accept who I was, and to not conform to what my community wanted so badly, and to walk away from relationships, and to cut out, to just stay away from family members that were negative and had a lot to say. Because at the end of the day, in my soul truth was that I couldn't choose who I was. I couldn't. So we ultimately can't talk about not being myself. I can't talk about not being myself. I can't, just say that, I couldn't be myself because people or things were holding me hostage. What are those things? It is the patriarchal and discriminatory attitudes and perceptions of people in our communities. And it is not just a responsibility. It is just by simply being who you are. Your being needs to be a form of activism, because younger people are you're trying to pave the way, forge the way for them so that they don't have to go through these things. So in 2010, I was diagnosed with clinical depression, major depressive disorder, and it continued after that, because I was extremely saved back then, so I didn't go on medication, because I believed that my faith in God would cure it. They told me that it was an attack of the enemy, and so it took me on a very dark journey. I got a tattoo a few years ago to declare my liberation from any kind of oppression that I had allowed, because it made me a bit more depressed, because I didn't accept who I was. The quote says on here, it's my own words: "Your worth is bigger than the things that broke your beloved heart. So be gentle with yourself, for the things you have suffered is not who you are." So having had a history of mental health issues, how do I cope with it now? I was on medication after I realized that I was in a very toxic relationship with myself. So I had to change that. I had to change my self-talk. I had to change not going to church anymore. That was one of the biggest decisions that I had to make, because I had put up a front for so long. So I had to be honest with myself. I had to challenge myself, because I couldn't accept myself if I wasn't honest with myself. So at the end of the day, acknowledgement is the first step towards healing. So I had to acknowledge I'm gay, I'm queer, and that started the healing journey for me. If you think about living in South Africa, where the framework of our legislature is where we are allowed to get married, the discriminalization of sodomy, that was done away with. So being one of the first African nations to do that. But the challenging thing about that is that even though our legislature is ahead of us, so to say. The legislature is ahead of us, but there's a disconnect between the legislature and what the people know about queer identity. And I think that is so important, because I swear that people would have an easier journey if they heard stories like these. So a few years back, I had to have a coming home. I had to return to myself. I had to have a ponderosa, and I had to return to myself. I actually realized during this time that I was actually funny, and I could make a lot of people laugh because I was being who I was. But I also had to realize to be very conscious of it. Very conscious of it, to share my light and do no harm. Because sometimes there can be a bit of underhanded shade thrown at people, but I had to learn how to be conscious of my interaction with people. And it's a very great journey to do some introspection and to be aware of what you share. I think the greatest lesson ever in my life was that love is the greatest power, and that love conquers. I was never in a stable relationship when I didn't accept who I was, but thank you, Jesus. When I started to love myself, I started getting into real healthy, loving relationships and friendships, and the dynamic in my family started to change. So I want to encourage people that it's not impossible for people to love you. It is not impossible for people to accept you or to welcome you. At the end of the day, you don't need people's acceptance. You just need their understanding. Because people, they have the right to their beliefs. They have the right to believe what they have to. They have the right to believe religiously also what they want to. But at the end of the day, you also have a responsibility to love, and to love out loud. Because at the end of the day, that is how we fight the patriarchal system, and that is how we fight the discrimination, by living out loud and loving out loud.